Yo! All right. I'm doing good. It's been a little while, actually.
It has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're back in business. And, of course, what are we talking about here? We're talking about, obviously, Janthea Wilds, which you have been fortunate enough to break into early.
Yes,
and mess around. He's seen it all. He's seen all the crazy stuff that's going on there. He's fought the giant tree boss. Variety of exciting things, actually. Very, very cool, actually. Yeah, I guess what I want to ask you is, like, where are you feeling about... What are you feeling about the game right now? Like, with Janthea Wilds coming up? Like, how are you feeling about it? Because, like, for a bit of context, right? I know that you liked the Soto release initially, something you talked about in your video, but then felt like the follow-up patches maybe kind of declined a little bit, I think, right? All that kind of stuff. Like, if you had to guess right now, are you thinking that Janthea Wilds is going to be, like, significantly better than Soto? Or about the same, or worse? Full doom, despair?
Well, no, I think it's like in some ways yes, in some ways no. So I think the maps and events, like the event structure, even though there isn't a meta event, I think the world bosses and just the total vibe of the world is going to land better than Secrets of the Obscure did. Because I think those maps got quite old quite quickly, at least in my opinion. But then on the replayability side, at the very least, Secrets of the Obscure did have 2 strikes. It did have the Astral Ward armor set to work towards. It had 2 metas to come back to. I didn't particularly like those metas, but it did have them. So, yeah, I think on the replayability side, I'm not full doomer. I am just kind of like interested to know what their plans are with that. I'm sure they've got something in place outside of homesteads, but I am very curious to see how they pull that off, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think overall, it will probably land better than Secrets of the Obscure. If only because each of the features, I think, are far more compelling than the ones brought by Secrets of the Obscure. I mean, we've got, like, the spears coming, which I think is better than Weapon Mastery for sure. We've got the Warclaw, which I think its implementation is much better than the Sky Scale in Secrets of the Obscure as well. It didn't add too much there. The Homesteads as well. I mean, that's a massive expansion selling feature that Secrets of the Obscure did not have. So, yeah, I think overall it will probably land better. But I'm going to be kind of a bit more cautious about the follow-up patches, because that seems to be where they've tripped over in the last, number of releases.
Yeah, I think...
But overall, very positive, very excited.
Yeah, I think I'm feeling pretty good about the follow-up patches, actually, in a way, because if I look at them, there's actually a lot of content in there, and I definitely agree with you that...
Yeah.
Definitely a weakness of the expansion is going to be that replayability, and that's almost like a little bit too hasty to say, because of course we do have these world bosses. We know that we have 3 world bosses on the second map that are existing, of course 2 being attached to the same event, and on the first boss we kind of have, with the first map we have that like bear duelist that's going on there at the same time, so we know that that's happening. There's like some replayability there for sure, and I definitely think that I like the setting up of the reward structure of the homestead. Essentially, like, it being, like, a really cool thing that players can go after there as well. But, yeah, it's an interesting experiment to see the replayability. But I do agree that, the launch experience is maybe going to be a little bit wonky, because a lot of that content is kind of exploration-focused. It is a little bit like that. And I think that's a really interesting side effect of, like, the new... the new model, in a way. Like, we're almost getting all of our exploration content dropping day 1. And then the next update is going to be, there's a raid and a convergence, right? So it's like a big dose of, like, the more replayable stuff that's happening 3 months after the launch there as well. And then after that, of course, that's, the map is also starting to come in at that point as well, right? With the second update, the second and third updates having these...
we don't know if that one has a meta. That one could have a massive meta. That might be the big meta map, to be honest. So, yeah, and I don't think necessarily that structure is bad. I guess we'll just be, interested to see how all that plays out, because I am far more excited for a raid than I am 2 strikes. So, yeah, very keen for that. And, I am very excited for the follow-up patches for sure. I think it's just the launch that's kind of like a bit,
Yeah, that's definitely
It'll
like
be a bit
where
more
I'm at as
juicy
well.
stuff.
I'd agree. I think that, the launch... I do like that there are going to be some collections to go after towards that legendary spear and the legendary backpack that are happening on launch. I think that's a good decision to have that in there. And one thing that I actually do like as well is the fact that you have to unlock the relics, even if you have the legendary relic, right? So now you're going to need to, you're going to have to go after that. You have to go and unlock all of those. There's a good amount of stuff there as well. But yeah, I do hope that those world bosses are really good and, are going to, keep me playing, right, in that new content, right? Because even though, Guild Wars 2 is horizontal, and that means all the content is still, relevant. That's great. That's a really great feature of the game, right? But also, I kind of want to play the new stuff too, right? I want to be playing. I want to have that like brand new. I want to go explore the new maps. I want to be coming back to the same maps like over and over again and like blasting, right, and like grinding all the new content out and all that kind of stuff. I want to have that experience too, and that's definitely something that I think might be a little bit absent here, but. Yeah. What I find interesting, actually, and this is kind of interesting, actually. Wait, what is your take on Dragon's End? Do you like Dragon's End? Like, how Dragon's End was?
I really did. Yeah. I still really like it, but the highlight for me is just that final battle. Everything before that, at this point, because I've done it so much, I just don't really care for it, to be honest. Like, all the extra escort, ad clearing style stuff just doesn't do a lot for me these days. So it still ranks high up there, but I to be honest, I feel like it's not as clean as something like Dragon's Stand. Like, I think that is just a cleaner
definitely
meta event design, you know what I mean? Yeah.
So, the reason I kind of bring that up is because I almost have a bit of a suspicion, actually, that the open world maps, maybe even the new one, like the third one as well, might end up being a bit more exploration focused, and they might be experimenting with kind of putting meta events into instances instead, if that makes any sense, because there's a couple of things that made me think this, right? Like, there's a Convergence coming out with Convergence CM, but they also said that the Convergence is going to be harder in Janthea Wilds too.
Yes.
Right, and that's very interesting to me, like, because it seems like they want to try to maybe put that style of content into an instance, essentially. So, like, one, it's a bit more on demand, so it's kind of like disconnected from like the main, I guess, kind of loop of the game, right? That's kind of like spinning on all over the place, because they do actually have an issue with maps starting to overlap with each other. That is actually kind of problematic when there's like so much of this stuff going on.
Sure.
But also, it means that they can kind of go a little bit harder on it, right? And not have to, like, gut Dragon's End, like they kind of had to with EOD.
Difficulty modes.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with that CM, because, I think it's a valid complaint if you have something like Dragon's End and people really struggle with it, and it's like, man, should this really be an open world? I think that's a valid complaint, right? It's a valid thing to at least address.
Totally.
But if it's a Convergent CM, then I don't know what to tell you. It's a challenge mode, right? It's supposed to be hard, right? You know what I mean? It's like, so then I think it becomes legitimate, right? It legitimizes that style of content, like if they go that direction potentially.
Yeah, and I mean, metas have always felt like 50-player raids anyway. Yeah. And the fact that you've kind of got these days, you've got to queue up, like 10, 15 minutes beforehand in the LFG to then essentially open a new map with that group to do the meta with your allocated 50 people. It is essentially a raid, except right now we've got to go through sort of a full contrived process to ensure that we get the full 50 that's in the squad to participate. Yep. So, yeah, like I'm kind of optimistic about the new sort of convergent structure. I do think it's interesting that they seem to want to push the difficulty higher, because I've been doing a bit of convergence lately, and I typically just do the public one if there's nothing running, and every time we have gotten Umbriel, it's been a full wipe. And I'm like, whoa, they want it to be harder in the next one. So that's been interesting, but I like it. I like the challenge. I think it's fun. It gets people chatting and trying to coordinate, even if we lose. I think it's always a fun interaction. So I think as long as there's some rewards for failure, and it's not just like the entire 25 minutes has just been completely wasted, then that'll be okay. Yeah, I definitely like the design on that as well, for sure. And it's something that I kind of appreciate about the open world boss as well, actually, is that it had those green circles on it. I believe this is something that Final Fantasy does as well, and probably other games too, obviously, where
it's like the same telegraphs that you see throughout a lot of areas of the game. So like when you come up against it in, let's say, a raid or something like that, it's not really a surprise to you. I think that's like a good design principle to follow, right? Like to have those unified telegraphs about the place. Because I think that ArenaNet has always had this problem, right? Is that like players struggle to pick up the game, right? And like figure out what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
So I think making like any kind of design decision that assists with that is good. And I think that convergences like are a good space to do that as well, especially seeing as they have that public version and they have that private version as well. And again, because it's its own little pocket instance, it's kind of okay to have an instance that's like, oh, okay, you know, this is a meta event, basically, right? Like, yeah, this entire map's existence is just for this, like, big kind of battle thing. My only concern, actually, and I'm curious what you make of this, actually, about the new raid, and I hope they come up with a solution to this, actually, and the convergence by, you know, kind of by proxy here as well. I really hope that when it ends, players have either a way to explore it, or some time to do so. Because, and what I mean by this is, right, you know how, like, you know, after you beat a raid, right, after you beat, say, you know, like, Spirit or something, you can go back into that instance and do all the exploring, right? You can check out all the environments, you can find all the little secrets, right, that are about the place, all that kind of stuff, right? And convergences, as they work now, after they end, they boot you out immediately, right? Like, you get kicked out. And that could potentially be a problem, you know, kind of causing players not being able to actually, like, explore that environment. That's why I was kind of hoping that the open world raid was exactly that, like an actual map that players could zone into whenever they want and kind of explore. But yeah, that's a slight concern that I have, actually, regarding like the raid and stuff.
Yeah, I am curious how they'll do that, because at the moment, like, the convergent map doesn't have a lot to see outside of the event, so there's not a lot of incentive for exploration. It sounded like, from what I asked, like I chatted to ArenaNet for a little bit after the preview, and it seemed like the raid was designed as a raid first and then a convergence second. Yeah. So I am interested to see if they kind of like my main worry was that the raid is going to come across like just a convergence, really, like leaning more on the convergence structure of just this kind of like big, well, not even big, but like a smallish open map, and you've just got to kill a bunch of bosses in each corner, and people can split off and do, you know, try to coordinate that. And then there's like one final boss in the middle, and not the normal raid structure of there being this kind of linear path through it, where it's one boss at a time sort of thing. So, but from what I can tell, from what they've said, it seems like it'll follow that sort of linear structure of typical raids, which is great. But I agree, there should be some time to explore. I guess only if they've added stuff that's like, you know, noteworthy that should be explored there. But I mean, there's a very real possibility that it is just kind of just designed for the fights in the same way that the strikes are, and there's just not much to see outside of that. So yeah, I am curious. I do hope that it is just like a really kind of new looking environment, though. I would be a little bit sad if it just kind of took a part of the open world and popped the bosses in there. I hope it is like this new bespoke environment. Oh
yeah, I very much hope that that's the case. Yeah, I'd certainly, I would definitely be disappointed, actually, if it was. I'm not going to cry about it. At the end of the day, like, the thing that I'm going to focus on is like the encounter design, which I'm really hoping is improved. And they've kind of taken a lot of information from Ceres, right, and so on, and learn from Dagda, and you know the and the Lonely Tower, right? When it comes to
I literally just did Lonely Tower for the first time yesterday.
Yeah. How was that? Did you enjoy that? You had some fun?
honestly, I was just doing it for the Astral Ward thing, so I just did tier 1, and it was like easy. I didn't like that. Look, I don't mind asset reuse at all, but I think Secrets of the Obscure got the balance wrong. And like for Lonely Tower, for the new Fractal to be almost the exact same environment that we've walked through so many times in Secrets, with the same bosses, with the same mechanics that we've seen them do elsewhere, that was too much for me. I think I wouldn't have minded if the environment kind of looked like an older version of the Wizard's Tower that's like kind of overgrown or something, or it's run down. It doesn't look like the modern version of the Wizard's Tower. Or if the bosses as well looked like younger versions of themselves and had kind of like more kind of rudimentary versions of their mechanics to kind of show their growth or something. But for it to use so much of what we've seen already, it was a bit much for me. As for the actual fractal, it was like okay. I was surprised by how short it was actually. In tier 1, you just kind of blast through. It felt like it took like 5 minutes. So I don't know. But encounter design is definitely been a concern of mine. I wasn't a big fan of Silent Surf either. So yeah, they haven't had a hot streak lately, I think, with Silent Surf, Lonely Tower, the Giala Delves meta, the Secrets of the Obscure metas, all of that. It does make me a little bit concerned, but we'll see how they go. Because I mean, I know that Sarah CM got a really good reception. So if if the raids are anything like that, then fingers crossed.
The meta thing is really funny to me because I do think that people have forgotten how epic like a really good meta event really is in Guild Wars 2. And I don't blame people for that, right?
Yeah.
I definitely don't blame people for having some fatigue with this kind of stuff. With some, like the ones in Soto, they really weren't it, to be honest, right? Like in terms of like how they were designed, for sure. But oh man, I really think people have forgotten stuff like Dragon Stand just being so epic. I've also really appreciated Palawadon now, actually. Like that one's really cool. Like obviously, Dragon's End. Like I think the pre-event on Dragon's End is not. It's not the best thing in the world, let's be honest. But yeah, I don't know. I am a bit of a sucker for a meta event. I'm just going to admit that. Like, I was definitely a bit disappointed. I hope we do see one on the 3rd map as well, because I do love the fact that having that that multi-stage, you have like the story, like you're, on Dragon's Stand, you're pushing through the jungle, then you're beating down like the towers to get past, like, you've got the blighting towers, then there's Mordemoth at the end.
Yes.
Like Dragon's End, you've got to do all this kind of crazy stuff.
Perfect to me. That's like the perfect meta event. If they tuned Mordemoth to be a bit harder so that the island mechanic thing still takes place, then it would be like, I think, the best meta event in the game still. Like that was just
there have been some absolute bangers, right? Like, and and I understand people being fatigued, and I definitely agree with it. Not every map should be that way, and I think that the thing that has really ticked people off about metas is that a lot of the ones in Soto like reset the entire map right when they finish. And I think that feels really bad, actually. I do not like that at all. It's funny, I did a full playthrough to do like to record a bunch of footage for the Soto review, right? And it happened to me like 3 times. I was like playing through the story and the map reset on me. It's like, oh wow, I've actually been completely owned. I can't believe this, right? And I have like a bunch of times.
And it makes it feel too gamey, like not organic in the way that Guild Wars 2 events feel like. Exactly.
100%. I think that is definitely suboptimal, to be honest.
I think my main worry is that is the quality of the recent events and stuff a result of talent leaving the studio, or is it just a misstep? That's kind of my main concern. I'm worried that like all the great events we got from EOD and before were made by specific people that I don't know. They might be still at the company, but I'm not sure that maybe potentially some of them have left now, and that's kind of led to less interesting events. In the same way that I feel like I've always loved the environment art of Guild Wars 2, but I feel like there was a noticeable, a little bit of a step down after. Going into End of Dragons, actually. I thought that all the environment art was phenomenal before then in Path of Fire and prior. But then after End of Dragons, I kind of like, they still look really pretty. They're just not quite the same level of those expansions.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I do think that I feel pretty confident that the quality, especially in terms of like the event design, is going to be up in Janthiel Wilds. And look, the thing that really stuck out to me actually, immediately, in fact, from watching your video was that, the Titan boss has a fully custom set of animations. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because like in Soto, a lot, and there's nothing wrong with asset reuse. I'm not criticizing that, but it's nice to have new things too. Right, like it's absolutely nice to have, these new ideas, like these new models, these new animations, and I actually really like how the I really like actually how that Titan looked, to be honest. Like, I think it looked really cool.
Yes.
I love the animations that it was
sick.
doing, all its like spell effects that it had going off, all that kind of stuff. That's fantastic. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic in certainly in that regard as well. And I actually really like the visuals of the expansion. I think that really inspired choice to have this, you know, based on Iceland, right? You have this like volcanic almost landscape. I think it looks fantastic, very striking, right? It's something that I really liked about. I really kind of like that about Soto as well, is that it was very different to anything I've seen before visually. I feel like it really kind of mixed stuff up a little bit and added some kind of like new ideas and like new visuals to it, which I was kind of a big fan of. And I think they're doing that again with Jan Through Wild. So I'm feeling very confident that like visually, I think it's going to be pretty interesting.
And it is impressive that they're still able to do that, given how many maps we've gotten in this game and how big the world map has become. And they've still been able to find some fresh takes on environments. It's really cool. I saw some people in your chat, I think during the live stream, people were talking about, they were asking about the map design and kind of like what maps it feels like. I would say it feels kind of like the first map definitely felt a bit Thunderhead Peaks-ish, in that the whole map is kind of this like downward slope, but with a lot more like sort of abrupt cliff faces and that sort of thing. It's a way that the thing with the preview is that we didn't get really, it's not like I had 2 hours of just like unbarred
it's like
exploration.
directed,
It
right?
was a direct
Yeah,
tour, and I was like, oh, I don't want to go too far, I don't want them to fucking kick me. So I just stuck with the group. So I'm not really, it was really hard to get an idea of how big the map was, but it was cool to like get to a cliff face that I thought was the end of the map, only to see stuff down below. Like I could see other updrafts and little towns, and I was like, damn, okay, this is like quite massive. So feels kind of between, like first map feels like a combination of like Thunderhead Peaks and like I think probably the Desert Highlands, in that it's got a lot of mountainous, jagged terrain, but it's also got these massive flat expanses. So yeah, very exciting. Map design was very cool. It was really overwhelming jumping in for the first time, and they're just being like, it's just a lot to take in, to be honest. And I really applaud ArenaNet's efforts to run that, because I mean they had like 30 media people in one squad, most of which probably don't even play Guild Wars and know how to play the game, and they managed to wrangle all those people through, and like 2 of them through this expansion, both maps, get them to all these events on time. Yeah, it was really well done.
Yeah, and I actually, I definitely like the marketing they did here, because I'm sure you saw that Lara made a video about homesteads, actually, and now today, actually, we saw an upload from Willow, kind of covering the War Club as well, actually, and of course, you made your video as well, based on, your experience there as well in the game. I actually really like that. I think that's good, and what I'm really happy about, actually, is that, especially with your video, actually, is they're actually willing to show stuff, right? Like, I feel like ArenaNet has, like, no, we will not show anything. We will never hype the game, not in a million years. Like, you will, you'll get it when you get it, and not a moment before. And
exactly.
It's definitely refreshing that ArenaNet is willing to actually show us some pretty cool stuff. Like, like that big Titan boss there as well. Like all the maps, kind of like the way it's kind of looking there as well. That's pretty exciting. Like some of the skins that you can go after, right? Like and all this kind of good stuff. Yeah, that's really hype. I hope they do that with future updates and the quarterly updates too, actually. To be honest.
For sure. I was actually quite surprised, because I knew that all the media people there weren't actually going to be doing videos. I knew that they would just be doing sort of blog post article style stuff. So when I asked ArenaNet if it was okay for me to just make like a deep dive video on it, I was fully expecting them to be like, oh no, we're just doing sort of blog post style things. So for them to allow that was pretty bananas, because I was like, yeah, no other expansion has had any content creator just like play and reveal like 15 to 20 minutes of gameplay. So that was exciting. I was up till like midnight just editing that, because I was like, okay, this is gonna be the first any proper gameplay anyone's ever seen of this expansion. So I needed to get that out there. So
yes,
very cool.
Very cool. It is like actually like super cool, actually, to see all of that stuff kind of coming into the game there as well.
And I think the interesting thing is that now that we've got Secrets of the Obscure before this, we have a good point of comparison of like where these mini expansions should land. Like I feel like Secrets of the Obscure was a bit awkward, because we're comparing it to these prior expansions that were huge and had longer development timelines. They just had much more content, so it was very easy to look at Secrets of the Obscure and be like, maybe it kind of underperformed. I didn't think it did, but only after you remove it from that equation. So it's interesting to see now. We've got the second expansion of this cycle. It'll be interesting to see where that lands. But I think it will land.
I think this is a really important expansion. I would actually compare it to Dragonflight in kind of like its role in the in Guild Wars 2 right now. I think that people's trust has been broken a little bit over the last couple of years. I think that the morale in the community is still relatively low, if I'm being honest. Actually, like about the game, like people are feeling a little bit like a bit of apathy, I would say. Regarding Guild Wars 2. And similar, in my opinion, to the journey that WoW's been through, right, over the last couple of expansions with like BFA and Shadowlands, like not really working out super hot, to put it politely. And then, of course, like a big redemption arc now with Dragonflight going into the War Within as well. And I think this, I really do think actually that Jan 3 is a very, very important expansion. And obviously all expansions are, but this one is pivotal. I think this is a moment where things could actually change. Within the game. I think that, if this goes well, and I really hope it does, obviously, right? I'm not betting against the expansion. If this goes well, I really think it could actually help build up some of that trust. Some of that trust that has kind of been lost a little bit, like over the last couple of years with Guild Wars 2, and kind of get people excited about the game again, right? And get a little bit of hype going back into Guild Wars 2.
Yeah, interestingly, at the moment, actually, this is kind of the point in time where I've had the most amount of friends online getting back into Guild Wars 2. I think a lot of people are quite excited for this expansion, so that's been really cool to see. And even though there's been a very vocal lot that have been a bit disappointed by some of the events with Secrets of the Obscure, it seems like the sales are going pretty great. I saw the sales chart the other day.
They've got I mean, look, at the end of the day, they are
pretty consistent. Like, it's
I mean,
them bikini skins.
Yeah, they added the bikinis
really
in.
The
and also, I think a really big one for them was actually the legendary armor as well, in terms of monetizing the game, because of course, like, it's a lot of gold, and the thing that you kind of look at to kind of track that is ectoplasm prices in the game, and when the armor dropped, oh boy, everything went up big time, and of course, what does that mean? It means people swipe, people are buying gold, right, and that is generating that revenue for ArenaNet. And again, I think ArenaNet are really clever with this, to be honest. Like, they really thought this one through. Because now, of course, they added bikinis, right, obviously. But also, this is the big one, homesteads. Not only are you buying the game more frequently, you're paying every year, basically. You basically got like a low-price sub fee, like, essentially kind of like for playing the game in a way.
Pretty much.
I actually have to clarify, guys. Yeah, I know it's not an actual sub fee. It's an optional sub fee. You don't have to ask that. I'm saying that because otherwise people are actually going to get mad that I say that. But you guys know what I'm talking about. Like, we're kind of messing around here. But what's interesting about this is that you're buying the game more frequently, and also homesteads are going to be a giga gold sink, right? Like, we've already seen that they've got a bunch of materials in there, right? Like, I'm sure there's going to be loads of stuff you can make, like hundreds of decorations to craft. We've already seen, this one's smart. It's a bit, a bit evil in a way, but they've already got like the impatient button right on the home system. You can, like, you know what I mean? Where you can like just throw gold at it, and it will give you like kind of a bat. You can basically buy the materials. Yeah, more materials. You can spend just throw gold at it, like drain the economy. Oh boy, they're gonna make some serious cash. Like they're gonna make some. They're gonna make some real money. In my opinion,
what? About damn time, to be honest. I remember a time where they were giving out bloody, like, an expansion for $30-40 that just had a ridiculous amount of content in it, and then massive follow-up patches with a new map in every follow-up patch, and they gave that shit out for free, and I was like, what are you doing? So pretty cool to see. About time that they started to really figure out how the monetization system works for their game. They've been killing it with the gem store, to be honest. I've been converting a lot of gold to gems lately.
No, I agree. And look, I actually completely agree with that. Like, at the end of the day, I think this is something that Grouch, when he took over as game director, really identified, was that the monetization for the game is just, it's bad, right? It just wasn't good, right? It wasn't sustainable for the company, right? And I got no problem with that. I got no problem with them doing this. And look, at the end of the day, this is my preferred business model. They are selling me content every year.
Yep.
That's like A-okay by me. I got zero issue with the developer saying, hey, we're going to release an expansion every year. Pay. Yep. Right? Hell yeah, I'm down with that. Like, that's completely fine if you ask me. So like I'm all for that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think the game is clearly doing well, right? Like the game is like feasting. Yeah. Ooh, black line key from map completion. That's what I'm talking about. Like we're going big. Let's go.
And it feels really good to be getting an expansion every year. I think about back, before we had End of Dragons, getting the announcement for End of Dragons a year before we actually got End of Dragons. It was a massive gap. So for there to like this came really quick, to be honest. Like it feels like we had Secrets of the Obscure yesterday. It came around so fast. So yeah, it's just super nice to have something new every year, and it provides a good entry point for new people on the outside looking in.
For sure,
they get to see that there's a new expansion once every year, and they get to take that opportunity to dive in.
It just makes the game feel alive, right? Like feel way more alive. Like when you go like, oh yeah, there's been no expansion for like 3 years. You go like, what the hell's going on, right? But you just have that like very easy. I think you're absolutely right. That kind of jumping on point, and they're really leaning into that in my opinion. Like with the way that they're actually handling this content as well. That they're trying to make the stories a bit more standalone. Right, like no more 10-year dragon story arc, right? All this kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
I was actually really interested to hear that they're we knew they were continuing the wizard story because of they released a couple of screenshots and stuff like that of some of the characters that were in the expansion. But I have to say I was surprised about that. Like I almost think it would have been good to have like every story be very independent, kind of on its own. Maybe have a couple of them tied together and have their own story arc. But I don't know. What do you think?
What I will say is that I don't think it's such a tight continuation that you would need to have played Secrets of the Obscure to jump into Janthia Wilds. Like really, from the preview I played, it was just like a short 5-minute thing at the start that kind of sets you up. The people are like, hey, we've got to go look in Janthia Wilds, look in Janthia for someone. And then you're kind of on your merry way with characters that weren't in Secrets of the Obscure, with enemies that weren't in Secrets of the Obscure, new environments, new everything. So it really is just like a very brief link. But outside of that, I don't think it's going to be so strict that you're going to need that extra context, which I think is good. It's still kind of semi-self-contained. I think you could just jump in and play from here and you'd be okay. You knew that some events happened with some demons. That's about all you need to know, really, to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But I am really curious to see what the story is with this expansion, because at the moment I still don't really know, which is exciting. I love that mystery. There's no clear antagonist right now, no clear bad guy, so I'm curious to see what's up. Very intriguing.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on there, right? Because you've got those Titans in the mix, but there's also the White Mantle stuff going on, and obviously there's probably some bear action happening at the same time. So that there's a couple of things that could be pretty interesting there, I think, with a variety of different directions they could go. I think with how that goes. But yeah, that's definitely very interesting to hear actually with that one. But yeah, I think they'll have learned from Soto on that, like with the narrative. Because actually, this is really interesting. I do think the story is really important here, because people were not super happy with the story in Soto. Right, like that, and I think that.
Do you mean the broader story? Because I feel like the launch story was actually okay. In fact, I thought it was quite.
I mean like the follow-up patches in particular.
Follow-up, the follow-up really dropped the ball.
It definitely really dropped the ball on that, and I think that's actually very interesting because something manifested there that's very uncommon actually. In Guild Wars 2 historically, like all of the story kind of casual players have been pretty happy with the game actually. What was really interesting is that during a lot of those follow-up patches, that demographic in the player base really felt underserved, right? Which is obviously like the absolute vast majority of the player base, like, not even close. But that to me was like very notable because of how uncommon that is. Like, that really does not happen very often, to like have that demographic underserved. So then they really need to like nail it here actually with kind of like the narrative and the world building stuff. It has to be good, I think. And those follow-up patches need to be good. But I'm honestly feeling pretty good about those follow-up patches. The only one that I maybe a little bit like have some trepidation about is actually the first one that doesn't have that map. But I do like the decision to split it into 2 instead of 3 because it really didn't work out well, right? With Ananias. That really wasn't it, to be honest. It did not work out very well whatsoever.
I think that's a good split. I mean, Yeah, instead of getting the first part of Nyos, we get an entire raid, which I'm much more happy with. And, you know, that's kind of fresh off the back of the expansion anyway, so people are still playing that content. So, yeah, that's good. I think main thing they've got to figure out with the story is just, like, it's really... It must be really difficult for them to be able to write a compelling arc with only, like, 1 hour of story gameplay every 3 months.
Yeah.
I really hope that they manage to find a way to expand that, especially when a good portion of that gameplay is like completing events on the map. There's not a lot of dialogue there to sink your teeth into. So yeah, I'm curious to see where they land with that. I think that's the only thing at the moment that I feel like they're struggling to find their footing on, is like how to deliver a compelling arc with such little bandwidth in the follow-up patches.
It's kind of interesting. I really feel like they tried to actually do that with meta events, actually, in Soto, right? Because the maps were very oriented around the story, almost abnormally so, actually, to an extent, right? Like, as in, like, the main plot. Like, this, I think, was actually a problem with Soto, even. Like, if you don't do the meta event, if you don't do Skywatch Archipelago, the story actually kind of doesn't make sense in a way. That's kind of weird. It's not true of Amnatas. Like, Amnatas is kind of its own thing, right? Like with the, with like Norris popping up, it's not really the same thing. But I think actually the most egregious offender, I think this is actually quite problematic. If you don't do like the Inanios meta, the Epoch storyline actually makes no sense. Like, you play through the story, and then you show up, and it's like, oh yeah, we've beaten him back. We've got to finish him off. It's like, wait, what? Wait, when did that happen? Like, when did that happen? Because that only happens in the open world, right? Like, that's all of that context is completely lost on you. So I think that's what their kind of attempt was with Soto. But yeah, that's like a really tricky one. I think you're absolutely right that it comes down to this bandwidth issue, right? Like, they don't have that much to play with, right? They've got 3 updates with about an hour of story playtime each. That is really not a lot at the end of the day. It is really not a lot.
Yeah. Like, movies can tell a compelling story within 3 hours, but this is not a movie, it's a video game. And like 75% of that is just playing stuff. So yeah, you don't have a lot to work with. What I am curious about, like, as you say, the narrative was really directly woven into the meta. And I think I'd be curious to know how much of the player base actually actively, like that casual player base, actively uses the LFG to enter meta events. Because I imagine if you aren't actually that aware of how the LFG works and, meta event timings and stuff, you'd actually find it quite difficult to organically get yourself into a meta event and experience that story in the way that you're supposed to. Like, trying to get into that meta event before you finish the final step. Even if it gives you an optional objective to do that, I think there's probably a good portion of players that don't actually know how to properly get into the meta event to begin with. Which I think ties nicely into our conversation about the convergences potentially being like instanced versions of meta events, because then you can kind of have a step that just makes that compulsory. They're just like, yep, you've got to do the meta event before the next step. Here's where it is in the LFG. You join it. Easy enough without having to wait around for a timer in the open world and queue up 10-15 minutes beforehand.
Yeah, I definitely think that actually this is where like a queuing system could actually be really good though, because like right now there's no button that you can press and it will like throw you into that convergence, right? You're gonna have to either wait for the public, which is every 2 hours or so, like, or you're gonna
be there like on the you're gonna be there as soon as it opens, right? Otherwise you're kind of screwed.
And I think this is definitely an issue, because if you think about it, like, ArenaNet are in a kind of unusual position. They almost have to make the open world map, and they have to invest a lot into like making a story and kind of weaving a narrative through the open world and the meta event. But the thing is, that has to be in some sense separate from the main story, kind of, because you can't guarantee that people are actually going to play it. So like that puts even more pressure on how they actually convey the narrative in the game overall, in the actual story episodes. So there's even more complexity there. I think that's kind of why they went for the world bosses, because the world bosses are ultimately obviously going to be relevant to the story. They're not going to be irrelevant to the story, but they're going to be like less pivotal, right? Like it's like, oh yeah, the Titans are the Titans are there, like they're like draining the Bloodstone, right? But if you don't play that, like the story's still going to make sense, and then that you're not going to have the same issue that kind of Soto ran into, as well in that regard. But yeah, it would be really cool if they came up with a way to kind of make that work. And I definitely think like public queue systems for like convergences, it will like spin you up a map whenever, is definitely a pretty good idea. I would say like they could certainly experiment with some concepts like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's spaghetti code or something, but it seems like really low-hanging fruit. I feel like you could just have a little queue thing, you hit it, and it doesn't port everyone in until there's a full, like, until the game's allocated 50 people and it's got the full squad, and then it ports everyone in at the same time. And you could just do that whenever. I think that'd be really handy for a lot of activities in the game. I think that a lack of matchmaking is what kind of hamstrings instance content at the moment. I think even if you wrap your head around the LFG and whatnot, there's a lot of people coming into the game that I think probably expect some sort of easy matchmaking system, and for it to be not there, get a little bit confusing.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely outdated. And I think there's also like the content difficulty as well. And this is almost like, you know, we're really thinking in the future right now, but I'm actually curious what you think of this opinion, actually, what you think of this take. Like, in my mind, the new raid on the normal mode should be like an Icebrood Saga Strike, right? Like, it should be like very, very easy, pretty much. Because I actually think that one of kind of a mishap they did with the more modern strikes in EOD and Soto is that, oh my god, why does it have like 50 million health, right? Like, what's going on here? Like, what is this? Like, it should just be like blast. You should just get in there and just like blast it down, like, in my mind. And then you
I don't know if, I don't know if it should be so easy that it should be trivial like the Icebrood Saga Strike. At the end of the day, it's still called a raid, and I think that has some connotation that it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. I don't think it has to be crazy, but like the Aetherblade Hideout Strike for End of Dragons is kind of where my thinking leads me for a normal raid. That's kind of where it sits.
But the thing is, LFR is trivial in WoW. Right?
It is.
Like, also, like, maybe the end. Sometimes, like, the end boss will, like, disband some of your LFR groups. So that's very uncommon, right?
Correct.
It's, like very, very uncommon.
Like,
Razgeth, like, farm people and stuff like that. It would, like, win. And, but like, in general, it's pretty trivial. And I feel like Guild Wars 2 really has to go in that direction. Because, you know, I don't know if you saw the numbers for how many kills there were on Ceres. It was, like, 80,000.
Right.
That's not a lot, right? That's really
Ceres normal mode.
Ceres normal, yeah. Well, total Ceres.
Yeah,
it's probably like combined with CM as well, but you know, obviously that's not going to be a crazy number. But that's not a big number. And by the way, I want to be clear, the context here, that's not a big number for Guild Wars 2. A lot of people play this game, right? A lot of people play Guild Wars 2 actually. And the fact that like there's 80,000 kills in basically a year, because it was out on launch, right? That is not a very high number. To be honest, for a game the size of Guild Wars 2. And if they, and the thing is, they are putting a lot of their resources into this, right? With Wing 8, like they're making an environment, they're doing legendary mode for 3 bosses as well. They're making it into a convergence. They've got to make sure that like the instance version is also kind of carrying its weight. I'm really excited about the convergence actually. Like, in fact, you know, when it comes to like the first update that's coming up, I'm almost like more hyped for the convergence, because like when I think about and I'll tell you why. Like some of the most epic, one of my most favorite things in all of gaming history was Dragon's End on launch, right? I'm almost kind of a little bit coped out that this might be a little bit like that in a way, right? And not the normal mode, to be clear. I'm not saying that they should make the normal mode really hard, like the public version really hard, but the challenge mode, that could actually be pretty fucking spicy, right? You know, like they could actually kind of go hard. Like I'm that's not without evidence, by the way. I liked Umbriel. I think Umbriel was like, oh shit, this is pretty cool, right? Like, okay, I'm liking this. This is exciting. with what they did and adding the CMs and the leaderboard. Okay, this is hype. Yeah. And you know, I will, you know, I'll definitely concede that, yeah, like what I really can't wait for is obviously going to be that, you know, that legendary mode, right? That's coming out with all those things. That's what I'm really going to be looking at, right? But I will admit that, yeah, the convergence is like mega hype for me. Actually, I'm like, to me, that's like mega hype actually. In my opinion.
Yeah, I think the public version of the convergence is essentially what should be that LFR mode that you refer to. I think that should be the really kind of piss easy. You've got 50 people, just smash it, just destroy it. And the raid should be, I at least think the raid normal mode should be a little step up from the convergence normal mode, because that convergent mode kind of exists as that easy kind of LFR pathway, pretty much. So. Yeah, very cool. Very cool. It seems like they're starting to get it, that maybe we should have a bunch of difficulty modes for instance content to cater to specific audiences, which is great. I hope that eventually they just kind of bundle convergences in to like under the raid banner, and that it's just all called raids. Because I got people asking me, what the hell's a convergence? And I'm like, well, it's like kind of like a raid. Just call it a raid. I don't know. You know, just call it a 50-man raid, and then call the 10-man raids 10-man raids. That's it.
And there's no reason they couldn't do that. Right, because at the end of the day, that's Vanilla WoW, right? Vanilla WoW has got 40-man raiding. Yep. Right, and I'd actually definitely draw a comparison between Vanilla and Guild Wars 2 in this regard. It's like, yeah, that's kind of how it plays out in a way. I think with how the gameplay is. So, yeah, I think that would be completely fine if they did stuff like that. And certainly looking at stuff like matchmaking, like auto matchmaking would definitely be good. But I think that if you want to have like auto matchmaking for some of this content, in my opinion, the difficulty has to be incredibly low. In order for it to work. Like, it's the same thing, right? Like, if you want to do normal raids in WoW, you can't use an auto group finder. Like, you have to join a group directly, right? Like, LFR is the only one where that works, and it's like mega free, right? It's like actual like Teapot difficulty, which I think is good. It makes sense, right? And they're even going further. By the way, they're going further in the War Within. They're actually adding like for the last boss in particular, and I imagine there's probably a reason for that. But for the last boss in particular, there's a straight up story mode that you can play solo, right? Of the new raid. Right. And yeah, I think that is a good idea. Like, you know, at the end of the day, players who kind of go for instance content and, you know, want to, you know, like get their build sorted, right, and all that kind of stuff. It's not that many people who want to do that, right? You know, like in WoW, let alone Guild Wars 2, right? So it makes sense that you want to provide accessibility. Like, I'm a huge fan of this. Like, it makes me really, really sad that many players haven't experienced the stories in, you know, raids in Guild Wars 2. Rather, they haven't, you know, they haven't seen, you know, especially considering it's Janthe, right? Like, so many people have never seen Wing 4, right? They haven't seen the Bastion of the Penitent, right? Like,
gosh.
Exactly. Yeah. Right?
Far out. It boggles my mind that with Secrets of the Obscure, they didn't, like, do something to promote people going to fight, what's his name?
Demos, right? Like,
Demos, Why wasn't there a thing to kind of like incentivize go do that? You know, we've got extra story right there. I was baffled when they introduced that like embolden mode, which is great, but there's like nothing in the game that just like flashes to tell you which raid is the emboldened wing, except if you go into the aerodrome and look above the portal and there's a little obscure icon that tells you what it is. I feel like there should be something when you log in that tells you this is the emboldened raid for the week. You can jump right in right now, because I think that is easy enough that you could jump in with anyone and figure it out.
I really want to see them. I think they've got something really special with their rush system they're doing. Do you remember like the season 3 rush they're doing?
Yeah,
like
that's working.
That was hype, actually. Like, when season 3 rush was on, I was like, whoa, this is actually really cool. Like, we're back in these maps, like everyone's blasting, right, going crazy. Same
I think it's pinned like to your screen,
it's like on the UI
right,
and stuff, right? It's on the UI.
Happening.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that system. I'd like to see them go harder on that, like, and really commit to it. Like, just have something like that, just like blasting like every week. Why not, right? Maybe not like on expansion 100%. Launch. Maybe like have like a week where the patch is like the special thing, right? Like the new thing that's came out, or maybe even 2 weeks, right? But outside of that, like between releases, let's go, right? Let's just have like constant PvP rushes.
At the release of Janthe, they're like, boom, Wing 4 rush.
Yeah,
that'd be sick.
Yeah, it'd be really sick. Like there's a raid rush, and like, oh yeah, everyone's doing you know, Wing 1 or Wing 4 or anything like this stuff. Like, yeah, just go and do that. Like, that, everyone's doing that. Like, it's on emboldened mode, right? Like, just put emboldened on it, right? So you can, like, just get in there and, like, blast, right? All that kind of stuff. Yeah, it'd be really cool.
Yep.
Like, really, really hype, I think. And I think they can use the Wizard's Vault for that as well, I think. I think that that's another really powerful tool they've got in their arsenal, actually, to kind of direct players about the place and, like, get people engaged with stuff. Like, in the game as well. That's also pretty cool, I think.
It's made me sad that they haven't put raids or anything in the Wizard's Vault yet, have they? They've never pointed toward raids, right?
They not raids. They did strikes though. They did. They even did Dagda challenge mode, I think, actually. Did they do Ceres?
Did they really?
I think. Wait. Did I hallucinate? I'm pretty sure they did Ceres and Dagda actually challenge mode in the Wizard's Vault.
Really?
In the special category.
I did not recall.
Oh, they did. Oh no, apparently they didn't do Ceres. Okay, they did do Dagda, but apparently they didn't do Ceres.
Okay.
With that one.
Gotcha. I think they. Yeah, I understand them not putting them in there in the sense that they weren't really sure if they were going to be going back to the raid format and whether they wanted to push people into them. But now that we're getting a new raid, I'd love to see raids in there. That'd be sick.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Give it a Giga reward, like 1,000 Astral Acclaim.
Oh shit! Yeah, for like getting a clear on it and stuff. Yeah, that would be huge.
Yeah, getting a full clear.
Yeah. No, I think they could even do one boss, right? Like, beat any boss in the Wing 2. That would be another option they could go with, right? And, like, make it super rewarding, all that kind of stuff. But, and I completely agree with you on this, actually. And definitely when it comes to, like, improving the telegraphing and, like, making players know what the hell's going on, like, what content they can be doing. Yeah, it definitely needs to be improved. Like, same as the LFG needs to be improved, right? All this kind of stuff. Like, there's a lot of work to be done there in that regard as well.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, what do you think... What else can they do for the next expansion if they've, got homesteads going on for this one? What's left? Because to me, I actually would be partial to an expansion that really does not have a lot of features at all and is essentially just content, like lots of content.
Yeah.
Just want a lot of instance activities, just focus on that for a little bit.
I mean, that would be my dream, obviously, would just be a full content expansion. I think one they could do, and this would be... I think they could make this work. I would love to see an expansion that is basically a full rework of fractals, and that's the killer feature. Right? If that so instead of making something new, like really slamming some dev time in there, like take a bit of a hint from M+, boom, get tier 5 fractals in there, slap a timer on those things, right? Like,
rework
like make
agony resistance.
Yeah, rework that. Like boom, new reward structures, like new, really try and make fractals good. I would say maybe even go back and rework some of them, right? Then maybe we fix Solid Ocean Fractal, for example, and that's kind of like a part of it. With that, I would love to see something like that. I think, and just, I think the issue with some of these things is that there has to be a way to monetize, and I think you'd say, well, you can only do tier 5 if you've got the expansion, right? Like, that's like potentially one way that you could go about doing that, potentially. But that will be a big one, I think, like a big fractal rework.
Yeah, because I feel like now that raids are coming back, the real gap for me is like that dungeon-style content in Guild Wars 2, and it seems like the recent strikes of, fractals have pivoted away from the typical dungeon format and towards sort of a strike style format, which, I just really want to see them find their footing there and deliver some proper dungeon content. I think that's what we're missing in Guild Wars 2 at the moment.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, definitely. Like it's because you look at stuff like Ceres and you go, you know what, we're getting there. This is pretty good. If they can keep pumping that stuff out, then that type of the game is going to do well, I think. But yeah, the dungeons, the last couple of dungeons have been a little bit rough, let's be honest, in Guild Wars. So yeah, that's definitely an area to focus on, I think, for sure. But yeah, like features-wise, I mean, the game is like pretty okay, I'd say. I'd say that they can definitely look at the combat style stuff, because getting spears is good. I don't think it's like quite as hype as an elite spec, obviously, right? I do think the spears are actually... I'm actually hyped for the spears, especially the Guardian Spear in World vs. World. Very fun to use.
I mean, I'm quite impressed, because I think spears are quite close to elite specs without doing an elite spec, which is quite clever. Because I actually asked them as well, and it seems like all the content in Janthea Wilds is sort of... it's tuned around the idea that new players would not have elite specs.
Yeah.
And that's why they made the spear kits so elaborate, is to kind of cater to those players that won't have elite specs. So they've got sort of something that's a little more mechanically nuanced.
Right. I'm saying this.
I thought it was very clever.
This is just my take on this, because I'm not actually a fan of that. Well, that decision makes sense to me, but in my mind,
but it's
that
elegant,
is not
right?
good. Right? I think that's scuffed as hell, to be honest, that they're doing that, because elite specs, like, are how the game is balanced, basically. Like, that, they balance the game around that at the end of the day, right? Like, in competitive, like, in instance PvE. Like, yeah, they assume you have elite specs. That's not a surprise or anything. That's not a secret. In my mind, they actually need to look... what I would do is I would say HOT is actually in the base game now, right? And you know, you just get Tempest basically, and you know, all the Heart of Thorns elite specializations come along with that, because that to me does not feel good. That's a good call especially where at the end of the day, like, elite specs are just kind of more fun than core classes, right? If we're being real, right? Like, there's just no way around that. So I think they do need to address that at some point in my mind.
Yeah, I actually asked them directly, because I was like, do you have any plans to allow players to get elite specs in another way? And they didn't have any at the moment. So, but I think that's probably a pretty low-hanging solution, is just to make the Heart of Thorns expansion base game, because those elite specs are powerful enough to get people through, for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, in terms of features, I think there's not much. I think they can look at the combat stuff, for example. I think it will be kind of cool. And I'm curious, like, from your perspective on this, like, how would you feel about this versus a spear? What about a new core trait line, right, that you can use? Is that more or less hype than a spear? Or, like, more utility?
To me, that is less hype than a spear.
Oh, interesting,
To me, that is less hype, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
I just think the frequency of how often you're using the abilities on spear... the spear, it's in your face. It's really marketable.
Yeah.
If they said new core trait line, that means
less
like
hype.
Nothing to people outside. Yeah, it's a little less hype. I totally get the intention behind it, but I think they'd need to bundle it with something else that's a little more flashy. I'm not sure whether that could be, to be honest, because they've got maybe one more elite spec in them, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
That's about it, though. After that, they've got to kind of come up with some creative solutions. I think we are due for some new utilities, for sure. Again, I just think they need to bundle that with something else. It's just like another new weapon or something. I don't know. Maybe I feel like maybe just a completely new weapon type in general.
Well, it's kind of what spear is, right? Kind of, anyway.
Pretty much, yeah. But now that they've done spear, I don't think they're going to do trident or spear gun.
Yeah, very
so
unlikely.
I think it's just onto something brand new potentially.
Yeah, that's
I like the idea of swappable weapon skills as well. They've done a little bit of that
with the hammer, right?
Hammer Untamed. I'd love to see more customization like that, to be honest. They could be like, they don't need to even introduce a new weapon. They could just be like, well, Warrior Greatsword has some new abilities that you can slot in. And I think that might be enough.
Yeah.
Going to be a little rough for competitive PvP or whatever, but you know what? I don't play a lot of that. Not thinking about you.
So it doesn't matter. So you don't care. You don't care about PvP players.
Yeah. I think you can adjust, okay? Adjust. Skill issue.
Just adapt. Yeah, adapt. It is a skill issue. Adapt or die. Yeah.
Which reminds me, I totally forgot that we're getting a new PvP mode too in follow-up patches, which is wild.
That
cool
actually
too.
is wild, right? Like, I don't think anyone saw that one coming, right? But in a sense, you know what? It makes sense that it's coming, actually. If we're thinking about it, right? Because Guild Wars 2's a really big strength of the game is variety, right? And they need to. I mean, look. Well, they don't need to. They can do whatever they want, right? But it's obviously advantageous if they maintain that. And again, this is not a secret. Guild Wars 2 PvP is like unironically dying, not like meme dying, as in like actually dying. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense that they're going to try to prevent that, right? They're going to make that not be the case. We've seen them really try to, kind of get world versus world updated with the world restructuring. So actually, if you think about it, it's not that insane that they're doing stuff for PvP, really, because again, like having those multiple game modes, having that variety in the game is like a really big strength of Guild Wars 2, big marketing point, I think.
What do you think it's going to be?
I've heard a bunch of ideas. Actually, this is actually very interesting. Angels was talking about this the other day, I think, actually. And he had an interesting theory on this. It's like, he says that if it's going to lead people into conquest, it still needs to have a node, but it has to be one node and it has to move as well. Like it can't be static, like just like it can't be like a King of the Hill mode. It has to like move around in some sense, but there has to be like one objective. It has to kind of involve capturing to an extent, right? And it has to like move around the map. So I think he was theorizing that it's going to be like a payload style game mode, right? From like a lot of the arena shooter style stuff.
Yeah.
And honestly, that actually really that makes a lot of sense to me actually, that style of game mode, because you've got the movement, you've got the dynamic stuff going on, but it's simpler, right? You know, you've got one objective, you chase it around the map, you know, very, you know, easy to understand, right? Like Guild Wars 2 combat, you're learning how to fight, right? And then you know you're kind of just like go forth, right? Like go forth into PvP and like figure out how to fight, because that's like the really big one. I think the issue with PvP right now is that new players are thrown into this environment where they have to learn how to play their class, but also learn how to play Conquest, right? And that is rough, right? That is real rough. To be honest, especially with
across many different maps as well, with completely different
objectives, right, and all this kind of stuff. You got secondary objectives, and I'm not gonna lie, it's very funny. Those aren't really explained in game very well at all. You know, like all that kind of stuff.
Time, I had no idea what they were even for. I was like, "There's a mob here. What's that doing over there? What's this bear here? What's?"
So I really think that like streamlining it down, like making it simpler and focusing on combat, right, is really important for that, because they, you know, I had an interview with the devs, right, and they were very adamant like Conquest is not going away, like it is still going to be the main competitive game mode. So I think what could be interesting is almost it replacing unranked entirely. So like instead of Conquest and unranked, this new game mode is going to be unranked. Potentially, or maybe, you know, it'll probably show up in the off seasons, you know, in ranked as well, maybe, right? Like, so like everyone's kind of funneling into it, and there's like, you know, because you have like the 2v2 season that's got ranked on it, and you've got the off season, right? Like, I think that stuff is probably going to see some usage, I think. But that's the way I see it going. Like some kind of simpler game mode that still has kind of some of the elements of Conquest to it, but not all of them, to essentially allow players to figure out how to actually pilot their character and press their buttons, right? Like, because that's where people are getting stuck, right? Is like learning how rotation works and all that kind of stuff, while also trying to press their buttons frantically, right? In these situations.
And I think a payload mode like that incites a lot of, you know, full team fights. That are just happening frequently. So you learn how to deal with that. You learn how to, you know, work with other people's abilities to set up team wipes and that sort of thing. So I think that'd be a really clever mode. Yeah. The other idea I had was that I imagine potentially something that sits between PvP and World versus World. That's kind of like a 10v10 sort of thing. That'd be kind of cool too. I mean that would be interesting. That would be like pure chaos. Live quite separately. Like it would not be the best way to teach people how to kind of like enter Conquest. It would just be like complete. And
I think that is kind of part of their. I think that is kind of part of their design brief. So I think it will be like objective focused to an extent. As well. And I don't know. I feel like really big fights in Guild Wars 2 tend to descend into like absolute insanity, to be honest.
So
totally. Going big is maybe not the way that I would want to go, to be honest, in terms of that. But I mean, they were experimenting with it. Like they were developing like a 10-player map at some point. So like maybe we do see that pop up at some point. I think in that regard with like the PvP stuff. But it's pretty interesting. We definitely live in interesting times for Guild Wars 2, I think, actually. I guess
we really do. You know what? Even though they are inconsistent, what excites me about the Guild Wars 2 expansions is that I honestly never know what I'm going to get, and that makes it exciting. So it doesn't always pay off, but there's no strict formula that makes me like too comfortable. It makes it too predictable. I never know what I'm going to get in the next Guild Wars 2 expansion, which makes me very excited every time to find out what it is. I do think they are going to have to actually solve like some of these issues around content to an extent, though, because like I think you raise a really good point. Like, where do you go from here in terms of like new killer feature? Like player housing, to me, I'm not saying this is how they feel about it, but like if there's a break in case of emergency, that's it, right? You know what I mean? Like that is a killer, right, to add to your game. And they went all out on it. It really is fantastic, you know, from what I've seen so far. It's that, you know, and ArenaNet usually do a very good job with features like this. It's not a surprise to me that they did well whatsoever. But that is like
the big one, the big one. That's arguably even like higher impact than mounts. I feel like actually it's going to be on that level. I think in terms of like how many like.
Yeah, right.
I think players love this stuff. I think players like fucking love player housing, a lot. Like it's going to be like up there with mounts for sure. In terms of like how how people are going to engage with it, but where do you go from there? I think that's a really, really great question. Like because the game is very feature complete, if we're being honest, right? Like it really is. And, you know, like it's an old game at this point. They've added a lot of stuff to it. Like we're really getting there now in terms of like feature completeness. At some point, you kind of have to just send the content, right? And this is an interesting point of contrast to other MMOs. If you look at WoW and WoW and 14 in particular, I feel like they just go content, right? Like that is what those expansions are. When you're buying a WoW expansion, you're buying those raids, you're buying the story, you're buying the maps, right? Like all the skins, all the achievements, right? All this kind of stuff. Like that is where they market it, right? And it's the same with 14, I think. In that regard. Guild Wars 2 is an MMO that often does have its expansions defined by features, right? You know, for sure. And that is something that I think you can't rely on entirely indefinitely, especially when you're doing kind of like a yearly expansion model that's, you know, you've got to keep putting this stuff out, right?
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, this potentially could be like the final sort of feature-packed expansion. Which is, really interesting. I'm keen to see where they go from here.
I mean, I'm sure they've got a couple of surprises in store. Like, at the end of the day, you know, it is literally their job to figure out what we want before we even know we want it, right? If you know what I mean. And, you know, maybe in a year's time, we'll be thinking, how could we not have thought about this? This is, you know, like, oh my God, we're fools. Of course they needed to add this to the game. They had to add it to the game. You know, in that regard, you know, we'll see when we get there for sure. But yeah, I'm definitely very curious to see where they're going to go with like the development for the next expansion after this. I think, I am definitely expecting like kind of, we're going to make this system way better. Instead of like adding a new system, we're going to rework this one, right? You know, horizontal, right? Stuff like, we're going to add a new house, right, that you can unlock, right? And there's like a new homestead.
I'd love
that you can
shared
do.
homesteads as well. Something where you can just like, with your friends, you can all share one homestead and constantly like log back in, see what they've built or whatever. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I'd love something that kind of that leans into the community aspect of Guild Wars 2 and blends it with stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like they could maybe do that with Guild Hall improvements, right? Like they could like rework Guild Halls a bit. And because
I'm thinking at some point there'll be like a guild focused expansion that's proper new guild missions, new incentives to do stuff with guild mates.
Because I feel like that could be a bit of a killer feature. Proper like guild recruitment systems, like guild, you know, all this kind of stuff. The issue is like. And I think one of the reasons why we haven't seen updates is like, how do you monetize that, right? Like, where does the, you know, how do you make that like locked to the expansion in a sense, right? Rather than just like, we're just adding that to the base game. Because of course, guilds and, you know, guild halls is HOT, right? Like at the end of the day is what that is. More than anything else. So I think there are some challenges with reworking features for Arena. I think it's a little bit non-trivial, to be honest. But I mean, I guess we'll see. We'll see when we get there.
For sure. Yeah. Exciting times.
Yeah.
I did hear you on stream the other day say something that I resonated with, which is I hope in future they figure out how to implement all that stuff that comes later into the launch of the expansion. Because this would be a giga expansion if it launched with the raid, with the legendary gear, all that front loaded. Because that's the first impression. So yeah, I'm curious to see how much more they can pack into that. Hopefully all that new money from bikini skins can allow them to do stuff like that.
Yeah, this is actually a really key point that I want to see some iteration on, actually. And I think it's probably a little bit less relevant in a game like Guild Wars 2, honestly, because I feel like people are not kind of in it for the blast as much. I think, you know, people aren't in it for like the mega, you know, super, I'm going to send it like 10 hours, let's go, you know, I've taken time off, I'm going to blast, right? I think there's a little bit less of that in Guild Wars 2, which, you know, that's fair. But I do kind of want that like mega expansion hype, right? I want to have that recaptured, you know? I want to have those moments like we're all doing Dragon's End at the same time, or Dragon's End, or Chuck, you know, we're all, or you know, something like we're all uncovering the Griffin, right, in Path of Fire. Like, everyone's trying to figure out the collection, right? You know, I want something like that on launch, you know, like, hit us with something like that on the launch of the expansion, you know what I mean? And I think I think it's quite possible that that is going to be a little bit lacking in Janthea Wilds compared to some of the previous expansions. And yeah, I would feel really differently about the expansion if they'd said, oh yeah, there's a big ass collection for the legendary spear on launch.
Yeah,
go find
the legendary spear.
Yeah,
for sure.
Go find it. Yeah. That would be so hype in my mind. Like, they're just like, oh yeah. And if they went like really hard on it, and it was kind of like a bit like Vision or Aurora almost. It's got like, you know, hidden stuff that you've got to find, like all these different events you've got to complete. Like, that would be so sick. Like, having that on launch would be so hype actually. Like, I really hope they find a way to kind of get that type of thing into the game.
For sure. Yeah, awesome. I think that about wraps it up.
I think it definitely does. I guess, like, you know, I want to get this take, because I've actually said this on stream multiple times now. I'm gonna get your take on it as well. Where do you think, if you had to make a guess, if you had to predict, where does this expansion end up in like the ranking of Guild Wars 2 expansions? Because I've actually
okay, yeah.
I'm aimed high with this one. I actually think, because so my order is the following. It's HOT, then EOD, then Path of Fire, then SOTA. That's my ordering of Guild Wars 2 expansions. I have made the bold claim, the bold statement, that this could be as good as End of Dragons, if not better, actually, as an overall expansion. Yeah. No, seriously. Look, and I think that's realistic. You know, I've looked
as an overall. You're talking about the entire expansion cycle.
The entire cycle. Yeah, because I've looked. Convergent CMs sounds really exciting to me. We've got 3 bosses with legendary challenge mode. I like the direction the balance is taking in the game right now. Overall, homesteads are going to be a killer feature, right? The world bosses could be pretty interesting. You know, it's got a lot of things that I think can be really, really good, actually, in this expansion, like really high tier, actually. So yeah, I'm a little bit coped up, I'll admit it. You know, I think it can really be up there, but what do you think? Actually, what's your rating as well? Because I imagine it's probably a little different to mine, right?
Actually quite similar. Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire are like really on equal footing to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I maybe would put Path of Fire higher, if only because I was like actually around for the launch of Path of Fire, and that was just hype. That was so hype. Yeah. And I think the storytelling was massively improved in Path of Fire.
Definitely true.
The whole like campaign was incredible. But the map still had that like really high quality bar set by Heart of Thorns. So I think I'd probably put Path of Fire just higher, but not by much. And then it would be beneath Path of Fire, Heart of Thorns, End of Dragons, Secrets.
Yeah.
Placing Janthea Wilds, it is really hard to compete with, I think, the expansion cycles of Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire with everything that came at their launch, plus all the living world after. That's tough, but you know, they just cranked out a lot. It's just a lot of content back in those days. So actually, like, yeah, I was surprised to hear you rank it above End of Dragons, but if I think about it, if I think about the full expansion cycle, once it has 3 full maps and it has a raid and it has those legendaries, I think I would probably put it above End of Dragons too. I can totally see it landing there, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that would be too far-fetched.
I think it can happen. I think this one can actually be really good. This can be a very, very strong showing, in my opinion, for this particular expansion. So I guess we'll have to see how that's going
next week.
Actually, yes, next week indeed. Raider Blast. Yeah, are you going hard on launch? Actually, I guess launch is not good for you, actually, is it? Wait.
It's okay. I mean, I think my job that day will be just playing the expansion. So I think launch day I will go pretty hard, but I intend to take this a little slower than Secrets. Secrets I just blasted through the campaign. This one I think I want to complete the maps as I do the campaign and take it a little slower, because that's kind of the vibe they're going for. So I want to play how it's sort of intended. So yeah, gonna take it a little slower. After that day, I've got some other stuff to work on, so it'll be a little slow going after that. But I intend on fully immersing myself. in Janthea, for sure.
Honestly, you'd love to see that. And, yeah. I guess that just about wraps it up, actually, at least for now. A little mini tea time here. Love to see that. Fantastic stuff. And, yeah, thanks for coming on. And, obviously, yeah, thanks for sharing the video with us. And, you know, like, staying up all night, editing that, throwing that together, giving us the juice, right?
I live to serve. That's okay. So, yeah. Well, thanks for having me. And catch you at the Janthea World Launch.
Oh, yes, I'll see you then. But yeah, there you go. That's it. Hey, take it easy, my friend. Thanks for going on. I'll see you around.
You too.
See ya.
Catch you later. See ya.